Thank you so much for that kind presentation. The intervention today within this group of comparative literature experts, hopefully stirs some cross-pollination curiosity. I put together some questions that sparked my interest and involvement with some fabulous Romanian American writers, some of whom we have the pleasure of featuring today. The first and foremost is their Romanian American identity. Apart from it all, why does transnational mobility undercut exclusivist narratives of belonging and self-perception? Who shares national imagined communities? Who shapes them as basis of bridging cultures, as social capital for solidarity networks in an era of high transnational mobility? What is the role of diaspora writers in redefining ancestry, national cultural specificity, and the imaginary of belonging? When is the diasporic imaginary and experience of nostalgia alienating, and how can it be a resource for resilience? Why do we need autobiographical narratives in negotiating our simultaneous presences in multiple communities, native and adoptive ones? How can interventions be designed to promote the affirmation of one's cultural identity, a sense of well-being, of self-actualization? Would such interventions undercut the angst of social isolation, the toxic variants of long-distance nationalism? And here I'm referring to French riots with second-generation immigrants, or other behaviors of such, or the presence of nationalist groups within diasporas. So all of these questions stirred our interest in establishing the Immigration Research Forum. For those of you familiar with the studies of nationalism, my question references concepts from Benedict Anderson, Imagined Communities, Reflections on the Origin of and Spread of Nationalism, which has been around for about 40 years or so. So his concept of national communities as imagined communities stimulated attention on the dynamics of socially and culturally organized imagination as processes at the heart of political culture, of self-understanding and solidarity, and also governance. It legitimated national governance at the time. So his study of nationalism was also a major innovation in our understanding of social imaginaries. With these questions as premises, we're now looking at over maybe 5 million Romanians living abroad. So, and governance of this diaspora is a matter of political interest. Therefore, our involvement with those who shape these feelings of belonging, and primary among them, I would say, diaspora writers are shaping public opinion on this matter. Oh, am I going too fast? So as an organization, we convened several national conferences of Romanian American professionals in Washington, D.C. We established interdisciplinary professional councils in various fields, and one of the councils was that of the Arts and Culture Council, which initiated the Romanian American Literary Circle in 2020, precisely during the COVID pandemic. So amidst social polarization, also, if you remember, at the time on immigration issues with the previous administration. So and we also conduct autobiographical interviews using generic qualitative questionnaires profiling diaspora's most influential figures. I'll talk a little bit about that as time allows. The inaugural conference was held at the University Club in Washington, D.C., and was the first of its kind. It proposed the Diaspora Needs Assessment Plan. We were fortunate to have, I believe, UBB, Babeș-Bolyai University lecturer, historian, Romanian historian, emeritus professor Denis Deletant, talked at the time about a certain Romanian aversion towards cohesive, trust-based associative structures due to a legacy of systemic dismantling of any entities that showed any dissonance with the previous totalitarian regime. So he spoke about that history and how that informs our tendencies and behaviors up to the present. And it explained to a lot of us the degree of heterogeneity in our associative ecosystem in the United States. We're highly fragmented and know very little of each other on this huge continent. So during the follow-up conference in 2020, we were forced to hold it virtually. And it was during the first months of the pandemic, and we felt the need for solidarity, for cohesion, for peer support. Clearly, all this was exacerbated by the isolation we all felt locally as our lives were and careers were abandoned in so many ways. So we held 6 panel roundtables, and rapporteur of one of the arts and culture roundtables was Cristina Pejan. She shared the expressed need for a group dedicated to promoting Romanian American artists and writers, and that includes second-generation Romanian Americans who are more comfortable expressing their cultural identity and publishing in English. For them, Romanian is actually a heritage language, not a first language, not the one they're most comfortable expressing themselves in. And it's something we haven't thought about. You think of a Romanian literary circle as being held in Romania. So that was something that we took into consideration. The meetings are facilitated by a rotating chair, currently held by Domnica Radulescu here with us. Basically, we started looking at aspects of acculturation and the way we negotiate our environment and our belonging to American society. And so we're looking at that immigrants' heritage, language, and cultural identity tend to be suppressed and dissipate within the first 2 generations. Researchers in ethnic psychology, sociology, and anthropology have actually studied the relationship between acculturation and psychosocial adjustment and health, and I believe their insights would be helpful to any student of comparative diaspora literature. They look at the negotiating environment afforded to the immigrant and the diasporic group, the group's heterogeneity and cohesiveness, and the personal values they tend to profess. I just extracted some aspects about the strategies that are available to an individual or a group for that matter. So first, assimilation, which I see as an incomplete form of self-actualization, one of dissimulation, basically, of the host culture. That of separation, rejection, that is where I see nostalgia possibly rearing its head in its toxic variant of long-distance nationalism. Integration, which is what the mission of the IRF is, which I see as the optimal self-actualization of the immigrant, contained by both native and adopted community, and potentially engaged as a connected migrant. And I will try to explain that concept later on. And the last one, marginalization, which is I would suggest the worst outcome, which is personal mental health issues present themselves there with high risk of antisocial acts, self-victimization, and vulnerability, and to possibly extremist ideologies. A little bit about the concept of connected migrant that I just mentioned. A lot has changed over 100 years of recorded Romanian migration to the US, especially in terms of communication technology and transnational mobility. And I find the concept proposed by sociology professor Dana Diminescu most compelling. She distinguishes current migrants from the disconnected exiles of the past. She outlined a paradigm shift of a migrant no longer being defined by a series of absences. The migrant of this generation navigates transnational existence knowing how to effectively act in multiple presences, assessing a wide range of social technical tools, such as this Zoom session that we have today, tools that afford us the ability to remotely impact both host and communities of origin. So the new configuration of social belonging is not defined by physical presence, but by active involvement and meaningful intervention in multiple local communities. I came across her concept that I found that intriguing at Romanian Diaspora Conference held in Timișoara in 2016. She presented it there, and it captured me. We went on and decided, let's test this. Let's mobilize against the ingrained behavior of atomization and suspicion. And we wanted to test the hypothesis of this current generation of connected migrants that do not feel exiled or ostracized, but feel the need for self-expression and self-actualization. So since 2020, we held annual events entitled Outstanding Romanian American Women in Arts and Sciences, themed as opportunities to adapt Romanian ancestral springtime traditions and customs to our current needs for socialization and cultural affirmation in an urban setting. Just days before the pandemic restrictions were imposed in Washington, we held an in-person reception featuring resident poets and artists, and we had the idea then to invite representative diaspora figures from different diaspora hubs throughout the US, throughout the continent, and recorded their messages and projected them, and their messages were about their local community work and efforts, and we projected those during the event in order to give a sense of our national presence. I think it was first attempt at an emotional anchoring of local efforts into an imaginary national community. All subsequent events were virtual from then, and all are recorded and available on our website, available for your perusal. It was a highly transformative time in our associative landscape, and it led to a plethora of joint ventures within months from the pandemic onset. The Romanian Cultural Institute in New York joined our efforts and became a commendable national platform for a number of diaspora writers. Incidentally, before the pandemic, they believed that they were there to promote Romanian culture, not Romanian American voices. So it was an interesting twist, a silver lining of the pandemic, I would say. In addition, a number of virtual readings were held online performances of plays written by diaspora writers, some of them present today, and a series of virtual panel discussions were hosted by partnering organizations all the way from Washington, D.C. to Washington State, from coast to coast. So just to give you a sense of the stories of resilience, accomplishment, testimonies, and motivational messages, you can go to our website and see them even now. We have them recorded for each year. Some of the contributions I find very interesting. For example, please look up Nina Smart with her book Wildflower. She has a beautiful rendering of her Romanian American identity. She's also of African descent and UN activist against FGM throughout Africa. So an interesting composite identity that I think reading her book would be an interesting lecture for somebody that's interested in diaspora literature. You will find also the testimony of other writers who did transnational lives simultaneously anchored in both London and Washington, or on all sides of the Atlantic, plus their foothold in Romania. So these already give you a picture of the kind of transnational lives that we deal with now, as opposed to the past, the literature of the exiles or something of that nature. So I encourage you to look at also at this year. We have also had a wonderful series of testimonies, and It was a highly emotional time, as Mohammed mentioned. We're all affected by what is going on in Ukraine, and we transformed the event into a marathon standing in solidarity with Ukraine. But my observation was that a lot of the contributions were beyond empathy. Diaspora writers tended to relieve personal and family experiences relating to trauma, to uprooting, to being uprooted, and so related with the Ukrainian civilians being displaced by war. And I thought that was a fascinating turn to watch and to have recorded as oral history. Now, the Romanian the literary circle is just a safe place. It's not for public events. It's not for sharing publicly what the writers are doing and how they're experimenting with their dilemmas, and it's just a place where they receive feedback from peers. Where they try to give meaning to their migrant experiences. So among the recurring topics that I noticed were those of trauma during communism, both by themselves, and in the case of second generation writers, by their parents, so their emotional connection with their parents' trauma. There are some among writers focused on transgenerational trauma. And a particular interest in nostalgia, which is the topic of our conference. But nostalgia as the Romanian version of Dor, as an emotional space of coping with leave or family recounted traumatic experiences. Often it seems to be often related with women's gender roles, bodies, sexuality, and reproductive rights, which were in many cases difficult experiences, not necessarily a matter of levity, as mentioned. So Alina Ștefănescu actually held a rotating chair of RAUT the previous year, and she recently published a book titled Dor on this very topic. These are bonds that were created between the writers to the process and go far beyond mere feedback. Dominica Durescu here and her colleague Roxana Kazan published an anthology of poems titled Voices on the Move, bringing together a number of Romanian American writers, but also writers from other diaspora communities, ties that I believe will be essential to the successful projection of our artists' voices within this vast, diverse American context. And that level of inclusiveness is beautiful to watch. I'm a firm believer in the positive long-term impact of such mentor and peer support networks. And I would venture to claim that there is such a thing as a new wave of women writers pouring a surprising number of published works on our American literary stage, especially during these last 2-3 pandemic years. This I think they will ultimately define our diaspora's public image for our American public. These female literary voices are on stage now, and I'm happy that we will listen to some of them. I think what's important to note is that the public image will be shaped by these engaged immigrant activists and their writings. I don't know if you notice, most of these books are actually poetry books. Much of the published work in the diaspora is inspired by autobiographical experiences, and you will hear, I guess, a little bit from them today on this. I find the act of building a narrative identity most intriguing. It's an interesting concept. Taken from psychology in terms and it eludes a precise definition in specialty literature, it appears as a structured life or an integrative autobiographical personal myth. It is also understood as being culturally contoured, even constitutive of ongoing interpersonal relationships and conversational performances, a study of self-event connections. I've seen it described as such. So the poetry of our Romanian American new wave taps into this universal raw emotions, vivid experiences that we the public connect with, but which I believe need to be brought into a narrative structure, either in writing or through performing these experiences within context. So the act of putting our life experiences into a narrative structure forces order in our thoughts and feelings, positions us in control of those experiences, be it traumatic or pleasant ones, gives us agency in defining if we are the victim or the hero, the chosen one who miraculously and with our own resources made it out of those experiences. I hope the illustration here is relevant to that. The process anchors us and has positive mental health functions. It is found in the literature. It helps us nurture a positive image of self-regard, making sense of the past, and helps us discern the main themes of our unique personality. It defines us as an actor in our meaningful social relationships. Based on that theory, I implemented some autobiographic narratives, evaluating the language of diaspora figures I interviewed. I developed a series of profiles that were published on our website and also in Romanian in Revista Cultura, they are both first and second generation immigrants. The interviews trace the childhood absorption of family values, the role of mentor relationships in structuring personal ethics and coping skills in pursuit of successful careers and socially anchored lives. These are all highly resilient individuals, and so my goal in this was to discern the factors that help them cope in overcoming adversity. And why is this? Because I believe all these immigrants, we are all exposed to public discourse that can have negative impacts on our self-perception. That we're all exposed to vulnerability in a highly polarized environment. So it's important to look at how we build resilience against the adversities that are bound to come our way. So I brought in the concept of assisted resilience as most promising in helping us envision ways to cope and find right attitude towards our resources and eventual successful adaptation to any aversion. I found compelling the presentation by Professor Șerban Ionescu's treatise on assisted resilience. Malheureusement, Mohamed, it's only in French and Romanian, so not for our English speaking audience. But it was fun to read it because his literature review provides a series of evaluation scales as tools for implementing social interventions, and he explains the findings related to a number of promising protective factors in having such interventions. So I took that concept and said, how can I apply that? And here is what came out so far. I took the autobiographic narratives and the assisted resilience, and we are now looking at documenting the waves of Romanian American migration to provide historical context. A group of contextual narrative for a cultural identity that has not enjoyed much visibility, precisely because it is so heterogeneous as a diasporic grouping and largely lacks local resources to engage in structuring a collective memory. To the question of whether there is a Romanian American identity, the answer is that it's a work in progress, one that will need both a narrative structure and a common seasonal sensorial language provided by our diaspora literature, in order to create that engender that sense of community. So the most promising venue is to implement an intervention in Minnesota, and that's because we have there an organization called the Heritage Organization of Romanian Americans in Minnesota, HORA, and the Romanian Genealogy Society there. And these two grassroots organizations implemented several oral history projects that led to the professional recording of two impressive documentaries. One of them is $1,000 and Back. It's an Emmy-nominated documentary on the turn of the century Romanian immigration to the United States. And the second one is Through the Iron Curtain from Romania, which documents the experience of migrants that were shaped by experiences during the communist totalitarian regime and before settling in Minnesota. Both of them, I hope you'll find them. I have the links if you'd like to see them online.
You can send them in
I will chat. Yes, I will do so later. And now they're running the fifth oral history project, which is intended to lead to a documentary on post-communist era Romanian migration to Minnesota. So it will be a trilogy of the first for such a community narrative of any diaspora hub in the United States, and something that we hope will be a model for other diaspora communities. I will not give you details on how we plan to integrate both autobiographic interviews and aspects of assisted resilience, but it's going to be a pilot project into this and something exciting to watch. I do believe and I trust that the experience and concepts presented, I hope that they reflect on the vital role of diaspora literature in providing a certain raw, emotional, and contextual language for immigrant experiences. One that straddles both native and adoptive realms. One that's masterfully crafted, I would say, to provide narratives that provoke introspection, to instigate immigrant family discussions, and challenge us to all in constantly evaluating our simultaneous presences in both native and adoptive communities. Diaspora literature, I think, stands as a chance to help give coherence to our composite identities as connected migrants, and hopefully engender a sense of belonging to a transnational imagined community as a viable mechanism for social cohesion and solidarity. But I do believe we're just at the beginning, and it's incredible that in just 2 years so many publications came out. So I wanted to have to give now the floor to the actual writers. So I will stop sharing here. Thank you so much for your patience, and I do hope these concepts were interesting, at least.